Hello, Hauppauge High School. Welcome to the first episode of the Eagle Inquiry. My name is Joe Ferrari, and I'm joined here in the studio by our principal, Mr. Cook. Now, today we're going to be talking about something relatively new that has happened in the high school, and that is the new ID policy. So let's get right into it. Mr. Cook, this year Hauppauge High School students and staff received their new IDs. Mm-hmm. Where did the idea come from, and what's the reasoning behind it?
Well, Joe, kudos to you and your crew here for getting this off the ground. Pretty exciting to be here for the first ever edition of Eagle Inquiry. But that aside, one of the things that drew me to Hauppauge was how thoughtful the board and district administration were around thinking through student safety. And when I was interviewing for the position, it was really clear that that was something that, in multiple levels, a priority for the district. We had some things to think about at the high school level, and IDs are something that are really a baseline that schools across America are putting into place as a way to offer just another layer of security. Certainly, IDs aren't going to be the thing that, the singular thing that will prevent anything dangerous from happening, but I think it's just another measure that we can take to help secure the safety of the building. So where did it begin? I think really in earnest with the board and with district administration about ways that we can keep the students and our faculty safe. And then we've just kind of been evolving in our approach in as systematic a way as possible to launch different initiatives from the single entry point to IDs that are helping us inch forward in our approach to safety.
So you would say when you came here, you felt as though it was a big importance to have this new policy in place.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was already kind of in motion. Early on, we were having conversations about IDs. And this year, as we rolled into the year, it became a decision was made from me through the board that we were going to launch IDs. And so then it was a matter of getting it going and rolling it out in a way that felt deliberate, but that also didn't feel too hectic or too last minute either. So, why it took some time is we had to be very deliberate in our approach. And we're excited by how it began, but we'll talk a little bit more, I'm sure, as we go here. But it's not something that was made overnight. It was a decision that's taken some time, but is part of an evolution that I think we'll continue to go forward with.
So it's a process, really.
I think so, yeah.
Nice. Now, do you feel that the rollout of the new ID policy has been successful, and what has the new policy accomplished so far in high school?
Yeah, I think the ID policy and the philosophy around having a single entry point at first glance are the things that are most connected. So down the line, I can imagine a school where we're much better about having IDs in the building at all times. Right now, I would give us a C to a C minus in that part of the initiative. But in terms of the initiative being, let's make sure the students who walk into our building, the people that walk into our building, should be here, are held accountable when they do not have their ID, or are held accountable at least to making very clear who they are and why they're here. I think we've been doing a pretty good job. So, during our first week of requiring it, we had a couple hundred kids the first day that didn't have it. Some of that was on us. Some of that was on students not bringing it. But I think we've been very deliberate about it. I think if you're a student that arrives between 7 and 7:30 or 6:45 and 7:30, your experience is you arrive, there's administrators, there's security, there's a process in which you need to adhere to come into our building. And there's a lot of uniformity to that now. The numbers of students who are arriving each day without their IDs is drastically reduced. And we've had a lot of proactive work to then immediately interact with families of students who have forgotten their ID or lost their ID. So we feel like we've tightened that gap really quickly. And it's as if it's like second nature already for kids as they come into the building, I think. Maybe you guys have different opinions, but at least from my vantage point, it seems like there wasn't a lot of pushback on day one in terms of us asking for it. And then as we've gone on over the last couple of weeks, kids have done a wonderful job making sure that they have what they need when they arrive.
So you feel given the time that it's been implemented, you've seen drastic improvement.
Yeah, and I think whenever you're launching something with students, a new change or a new policy, the worry is, do you do it in too hastily a way where kids are shocked that it's a requirement? And when you shock teenagers, sometimes they can be disrespectful in their response. So when we're rolling out new initiatives, we're thinking about that, to do it in a deliberate way, so when it arrives, nobody's shocked, there's no moments of argument or disrespect. And I think if you take that lens, we've had a really great launch, because there have been no disciplinary interactions around students having or disagreeing with us, asking for their IDs. I think it's been pretty smooth. And so from that space, to think that the numbers are what they are, and there have been very little conflict around this new procedure and policy, I think we've done a pretty nice job.
Good.
And that's kudos to students as well, because I think you hear the tea leaves about where we are in 2020, you understand, and you know that we've attempted to be as deliberate as possible.
Excellent. We spoke with several students and staff around the school, and a big question that they have is, why was the new policy implemented so late in the school year? Not in September when we got here, but just in the recent month.
Yeah. So part of it is students have been getting IDs for a long time. There has not been a requirement to have your ID with you. And so in the fall, when we surveyed students, do you have your ID from last year? It was something like 82%. I'm making it up, but it was a huge majority in the 80s of kids that no longer had their IDs. And so then, and we'll get better at the rollout each year, because we had already scheduled picture day, we had already scheduled makeup picture day, we had already scheduled senior picture days. And so to think that we were going to print and roll it out with old pictures, then reprint and roll it out with new pictures, and to have three or four different days that we're going to serve kind of as our north around this, was silly. So then we hit a pause and we said, all right, how can we do this? How can we partner with our picture company to make sure that the IDs are printed? And then let's explore what other functions we might be able to get going in this first iteration, and then what are some other thoughts about where we might bring functionality of IDs down the line. Ultimately, we had shot kind of for the midway point as being fully launched. From a year perspective, we were able to be a little bit ahead of that, as I think it was right before midterms, but we kind of looked at it as either being January 1st is when we began, or right at the midpoint after midterms, and we're kind of right in the middle on that. But it was, again, intended to be, once we launched, feeling like we had a good system for printing, creating what we wanted on IDs, and you have a design there. We could talk a little bit about why those things are important. So that took some time. And if we had frantically ran to do it at the beginning of the year, we probably wouldn't have had as smooth a rollout.
So you wanted to have everything complete,
Yep.
everything in line,
Yep. And I
get
think
it
there's
out all at once.
correct, and there's a lot more we could do still, but for now, this felt like the right timing of it. If there, we aspire to not have changes feel dramatic and sudden. And so to get away from that feeling, had we launched it in the beginning of the year, it would have felt dramatic and sudden, and that we hadn't thought through. There's certainly things that we're trying to improve on related to IDs, but we're not frantically running around to try to solve problems about it.
So another question that some students, and mostly students, primarily seniors, they had is, if we have our ID badges, why can't we go through the doors that are by the gym and the pool over there, right by the student parking lot?
Well, you do on days when it's below 25 degrees or it's raining or snowing out. To me, the call for having a single entry point is still the most important call for a school building. So the IDs didn't institute any new way of operating here that would have changed the philosophy on that. So the most important philosophy is single entry point, secured single entry point. Having IDs doesn't change that being the core philosophy on our entry to the building. And so we are glad that the IDs have really enabled us to get even more secure on mornings when there's inclement weather, because now students are required to show their ID, which gives us another layer of security, but it doesn't change the fact that a single entry point is still the most secure way to operate your entry routine.
So it's kind of adding to what you said, it's still in place even without the ID, but now having the ID on top of that is
Yes.
just making everything more whole.
Yes, I think so. And this gives me a moment to kind of speak to the walk. I was really grateful for Buildings and Grounds, how they moved so quickly last year to put in the path, and grateful for students understanding that we're trying to be human beings when the weather is bad to help you on that side. But the reality is 80% of our seniors will be on four-year college campuses next year. And in my experience on college campuses, the walk is minimal compared to that. And so it's a luxury that I think students can come to school, drive to school, park to school. And I think it's a reasonable expectation that they walk a couple hundred yards into the school building.
Yeah. So kind of moving away from the entry point, when we come to school with our IDs, we're expected to have them at the single entry right by the front of the school. What would happen if a student or a staff member loses their ID or forgets their ID at home? What's the process?
I think, whether it's the entirety of this year or at least until April break, we want to be seen as focused on making sure people have IDs. So we're printing a lot of new IDs right now. When students say they've lost it or it's broken or they show up without them, we are calling families if it's repetitive where students don't have them. If a staff member doesn't have it, we're certainly working with them to make sure they get new IDs. We're looking at it like we want this to work. So we are working with students and staff to make sure there's no barriers. Down the line, I could see us charging for new IDs or having some other things that are associated with getting a new ID. Should you lose it or should it break or whatever. But for the time being, we just really want people to get used to bringing their ID every day.
So once the expectation is there to have it, that way you can kind of enforce a little more if we don't have it.
Yeah, and we're purposefully addressing students as they come in the way that we are, which is good morning, and then somebody right behind me usually is like, do you have your ID? Or sometimes I'm like, where's your ID? Students are doing a great job as they're walking in, being like, yeah, I got it, or it's on my nightstand, and then they walk and they sign in. We're trying to make sure, verify that those students signing in are who they say they are. We're being very deliberate on it. We take all that information every day, put it into a space where we're tracking that, and then we're following up with families if there's multiple days in a row. So if you're a student who's received a phone call or a family that's received a phone call, that's where that back-end system is really important.
Excellent. So now moving into the design of the lanyard. Whose idea was the design? Where did it come from? Can you talk a little about that?
Yeah, we had 4 or 5 schools that send their samples of their IDs to us. It was important to us that it was vertical. So like if you look at yours, it's vertical because it hangs vertically, and then you can see your name and your picture. By the way, great photo, Joe.
Thank you.
And then the other pieces we wanted to know, and I'll just say, Hapag, we're going to continue to work on making sure students are where they're supposed to be all the time. So the data that's on the front has to do with when your study hall is, when your lunch is, and periods when you have otherwise reasonable expectation to be in the commons or somewhere else that's not in the classroom. Our goal is to make sure at all times your students are exactly where they should be. And so this helps us with that, the front end of it. And the back end, I think, has a scanning potential, and that we will begin to continue to think about how we might, very good, this is like a commercial, it's good. Think about how we can use that functionality, which is associated with you, that ID, that scan is related to you, Joe, and then see how we can use that moving forward in other ways.
Nice. So moving down the line, with obviously we all have the blue lanyard, the clear pocket for it. Would you allow students to kind of decorate their IDs and their lanyards to represent, the grade level, a club, an extracurricular, or a sport that they're in moving down?
Yeah, I think so. Part of what we had to deal with in the rollout here was that some of the classes had done some fundraising work with selling some older lanyards. Different things had kind of been in the works. We had been playing with some ideas around, do you go class specific, so seniors wear blue, juniors wear white, just making it up right now. Yeah. And we felt like at the launch, let's just try to do everything the same. And then
get used to it.
Yeah, and then entertain that conversation, see what people want to do. I would say I'm not totally sure where we'll land, but it's certainly within the realm of possibility that people can get creative. Important things to know is we want these to be that you can break them off. People say that that's an important safety feature. I would say that's probably more of a safety feature in places where there's regular fights in school. We're lucky to be in a place where there aren't a whole lot. There's not a whole lot of that. So that becomes really a non-concern. However, it's something that we still want to see. And then there's a world where we want to get creative. But bottom line, we do want to be able to see your ID, your picture, your name. And there's a chance that we try to get some feedback on what we could do differently with the design heading into next year. But again, this is kind of like our beta test year to make sure that we get off the ground running pretty well with it.
Yeah. So even more with the ID, the layout of it, we asked some teachers, and they kind of responded back saying, if we scan their ID, maybe like their schedule pops up,
Yep.
to see who they are, where they are. Bathroom access,
Yep.
which has been a very big thing in the recent years. If we scan it and go to the bathroom instead of signing in, are there any future plans to kind of expand on that?
Yeah, a couple years ago, the district had a security audit where we began, I think, the process of talking about the functionality of IDs. So, some of that is wrapped up in cost, so in a world where I said every class is going to have an ID scanner out, and you're going, in order to show that you're present in class as an attendance tracking system, then you're going to buzz in. But the reality is that that's 150 rooms. What is the cost of doing that? How do we budget that in? So there are some thoughts and ideas about what are the potential, maybe bathrooms, maybe lunch spaces, maybe, I don't know, you show up to a club and you buzz in that way, just like different types of use cases for it. But for now, all that stuff is in the brainstorming space. We're in the process of thinking through next year now. So this spring, why it was important to kind of launch now too is we're able to get some feedback and some thoughts about how it's rolling out, and then what are real improvements we can make to using them next year, the year after, 10 years down the line, right? I think how IDs are used in schools 10 years from now will be dramatically further along than it is right now, but we're not going to go 0 to 1,000 in a single year, and we have to do it in a way that's sensible too.
Okay, well, just want to thank you for your time here in the studio with us. That's going to wrap it up for the first ever episode of the Eagle Inquiry. My name is Joe Ferrari, and we'd just like to thank Mr. Cook for coming out. If you guys have any questions, you can go straight to Mr. Cook, Eddie Administrator. So thank you.
Thanks, Joe. This is awesome. Good stuff.